Hey guys, and welcome back to the Warwick F1 Show podcast. This is the 41st episode of the 2025 season, and we are back with another race review. This time we are looking at the event from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix on the street circuits of Baku. We have come off the back of a very interesting result, which has seen the championship battle take a little bit of a turn, I would say. And has seen Max Verstappen potentially enter the fray. We will discuss that and more in this episode of the pod. I'm your host, Anwar. I'm joined by my co-host, Lucy, for this one. And I think the best place to start with this is just talking about what we assessed from this weekend, because we had a bit of jeopardy on the Saturday in terms of the qualifying. It was a pretty stop-start. And we saw on Sunday a pretty interesting beginning, and then it kind of came to a halt pretty uneventfully, I would describe it as. Lucy, what's your assessment of this Grand Prix?
To be honest, well, my assessment is obviously biased. So in some ways, this race was a 10 out of 10, greatest race of the whole season. Every single race should be like it. No, I jest. If we're including qualifying, it goes up in my ratings for the sheer amount of chaos that was qualifying. But the actual race itself was, there was some fun strategies. The overcut was in play quite a bit. And, there was, even though there wasn't necessarily a lot of overtaking, there was quite a lot of tension, like particularly in the sort of, the lower points playing positions, 5th, 6th, 7th, even 8th and 9th a bit. So it was interesting in bits, but also there was a lot of, it felt like we were filling for time quite a lot. And so for that reason, I'd probably give it a 5, maybe a 6. I think
5's a bit harsh, no?
Yeah, 5 might be a bit harsh, but this is also, I didn't watch the race live, so I may be, like if a lot of the interest did come from like tension and wondering whether there was about to be an overtake or what was going to happen with some strategy, I maybe didn't get that somebody who was watching it live would get, which is also very much a me thing. So I'll give it a 6, because in the end I was happy with the result. It was satisfactory, we could say. And also because the qualifying was very interesting. I realised we don't rate it based on qualifying, but interesting. It was a hot mess, but we'll call it interesting. Longer than the actual race last year, if you want to believe that. Because qualifying was interesting, I will lean more to the 6 end of the spectrum, but it was very much kind of a mid-race for me. I wouldn't be likely to rewatch it again or rewatch more than just the highlights if I was wanting to rewatch the whole season.
Just to clear it up, Lucy, you did say that you would have rated this a 10 out of 10 if you put your bias aside. She's not a Verstappen fan. She is purely a Williams fan. So all of you, yes, get your pitchforks away. She's very happy with Carlos Sainz, who, as we will mention later, got his first podium in Williams colours.
Yes, Unfortunately, I don't have the quote on hand, but I said before Monza that Carlos Sainz was going to get podium and you called me delusional. So I rest my case.
Yeah, look, I would never have expected qualifying to play out the way it did. I personally would have rated the race itself probably a 5, if we're including qualifying, maybe a 6. Just qualifying was a hot mess, and that kind of brought a mixed up order that kind of, in some way, gave us a lot of excitement, because the narrative could have been the McLaren's fighting through the field, but as we all know from the results, that is not what happened, and we'll get into more of the weeds with that later in the show. I would personally say a 6. Let's go through the race rundown before we get into some of the details and some of the more important storylines that came out of this Grand Prix. So Lucy, take us away with our race rundown.
Okay, so as we have already mentioned, this race was won by Max Verstappen in a very dominant Red Bull. Really, there was no question of his win ever looking in doubt. Interestingly, only the third driver to convert pole to a victory here in Baku, the others being Nico Rosberg in 2016 and Valtteri Bottas in, I believe, 2019. Yes, 2019. I don't know why I'm doubting myself quite so much. And in second place behind him was George Russell in the Mercedes, who made a very impressive overcut work, despite missing media day and generally being very poorly throughout the whole weekend. So a podium is really nothing to turn your nose up at, and Mercedes will be very happy, especially as it seems that the gap is really closing in the fight for third place in the constructors. Third place, what am I talking about? Second place. It's second place. Carlos Sainz in Williams in third, which now means that Williams have their first podium since 2021, their first proper podium, if you don't count Belgium, since 2018, and also means that they break the 100 points barrier. I'm very excited, in case you can't tell, and I will talk more about that later, so I have to contain some of my enthusiasm. But a very good result for the team, and obviously, fingers crossed, Alex Albon podium at Singapore, obviously, which now cannot be said is an unreasonable prediction. Kimi Antonelli in P4, Anwar and Daniel were saying for the weekend that he was that he was a driver like Tsunoda who needed to have a good weekend, and he did. Not on the podium, but considering what the gap's been like between him and Russell so far this season, and the fact he's had to come off the back of some rough races, this is good for him. This is a very good result, very solid, generally very unperturbed in P4, which is never a bad place to be. Liam Lawson, P5, not in the need of a great result, but considering how great Isaac Hadjar's been doing this year, he will be happy with a P5, and even more so just kind of really cement the fact that he's bounced back from his setback at the beginning of the year and is properly embedding himself in that Racing Bulls team. They've got a pretty solid lineup, really, I think, with those two drivers. And P6, speaking of Liam Lawson's rough start to the year, we have the man who's replaced him, Yuki Tsunoda, who is fair to say has been struggling in that Red Bull seat, but had a very good result this weekend. He actually did fairly all right last time out in Monza as well, but this was good for him, and very solid. P6 is his best result in a Red Bull so far, maybe even one of his best results overall. But that's very solid, and that's more what Red Bull will be looking for. So some more performances like that, and I think that he might do enough to, at the very least, mean that if Red Bull do decide to replace him with Hadjar, to maybe secure himself a seat back at Racing Bulls, or if not, maybe to stay in that Red Bull seat altogether. Who knows whether Hadjar actually wants it. P7, Lando Norris, very bad. He's still got 6 points. A very bad weekend from McLaren, at a weekend where nobody would have bet against them wrapping up the Constructors' Championship. They did not wrap up the Constructors' Championship, and Norris in general, I mean, compared to his teammate, he had a fantastic race. Well, he had a race. But generally didn't really make very much headway, given that immediately ahead of him, he was fighting with Lawson and Tsunoda. Just didn't seem to be able to make any overtakes. That may be to do with the performance of the car here. Mixed up qualifying probably didn't help him, but also in general, just a bad weekend, a weekend to forget for the McLarens, really. And they'll be hoping. Singapore was super dominant for them last year, so they'll be hoping for that again. And I'm sure that both Norris and his teammate, who we will get to later, will be hoping for that too. P8, Lewis Hamilton, followed by his teammate in P9. It went better for them than Zandvoort did. Double points for Ferrari, which I don't really think that, considering they were fighting for the constructors last year, that anyone would have previously seen Ferraris getting double points and felt relief, but that is really all we can feel now. So, yeah, 6 points. And I mean, if you are a Tifosi, you can now say that your team got the same points from Baku as McLaren did. And if you just look at the other results of the season, that looks quite impressive. P10, Isaac Hadjar for the Racing Bulls. We talked about his teammate already. And interestingly, we may talk about it a bit more later, but this is the first time since 2020 that all 4 Red Bull cars have been in the points. So very good weekend for Red Bull overall, and a very consistent one. Nobody's really dropped the ball so far, which is good. P11, Gabriel Bortoletto, very nearly getting another point for Sauber. I say very nearly, positions-wise. Time-wise, he was really nowhere near. Fairly anonymous weekend for Sauber, but that's all right sometimes. Ollie Behrman in the Haas. Again, in part this was because I mainly watched the highlights. Didn't particularly seem like Haas's best weekend. They're now one of only 3 teams this year to not have a podium, so they'll be hoping to rectify that. P13, Alex Albon. Not a great weekend for Alex Albon, considering the fact that his teammate, who Albon has been thoroughly outclassing this year, got a podium. And he got a penalty for hitting somebody, I can't remember who now. There was something involved there, which I'm sure Anwar can remind me of. P14, Esteban Ocon. The Haas drivers continue to finish fairly near each other in terms of positions, which for Haas is probably a pretty good thing. They're performing well, they're performing consistently. They just prefer that performance was for P2 and P4 and not P12 and P14. P15, Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin, one of the 3 teams, much like Haas, who have not had a podium so far this year. Even though there may be a couple of races earlier on where we thought that there was maybe an outside chance of that happening. And the way I see it, we've still got Interlagos coming up, which is bound to be a wet race where somebody rogue will get a podium. So Aston Martin will be hoping that it's their turn this year. Nico Hülkenberg, P16 in the Sauber. Very low down compared to his teammate, but again, just a fairly anonymous weekend for Sauber. I don't think this was a track that they were predicted to go especially well at, but they will still be disappointed with that because they have shown some genuine pace so far this year, and nobody wants to be languishing outside of the points. Lance Stroll, P17, not really much more to say for him apart from what's already been said for Alonso. The Alpines in their favourite position, which is last of the classified finishers. Both of them finished a lap down, and yeah, I'd say it's a race to forget for Alpine, but if Alpine genuinely did forget every race that I said that they should probably forget, they wouldn't have any memory of having competed in this season at all. So maybe it happened, and it did not happen for the only DNF of this race, which happened 3 corners in. And which was for Oscar Piastri. We'll talk later about what the implications are for the championship, what this maybe says about how Piastri is responding to being in a title battle, and when we get on to our weekly McLaren chat. But at least in terms of DNFs, the balance has been restored to McLaren, although really it was just a miserable end to a miserable weekend for Piastri. He never really looked in the fight. But yes, that is all 20 drivers accounted for. And I think that's everything. I may have missed something, but I'm sure we can talk about it later.
I think you hit the nail on a massive nail on a massive head, basically. I think you covered everything we needed to cover. Let's start in terms of the first narratives for this race. And that was Verstappen, because he showed up in qualifying once again, demonstrating why he is by far and away the best driver on the grid in terms of consistency and ability. He looked as if he was driving with traction control in really tricky conditions where other drivers were struggling, admittedly. If you look at some of the other experienced heads, Hamilton, where was he? Oh, I forgot. He was in P11. Leclerc binned it. Piastri binned it. Norris didn't really perform. Yet he, as consistent as ever, was able to bring out a result, which was a pole by about 4.5 tenths of a second. It's just, and then in the race, he kind of led from start to finish, didn't he? There was no real threat to him. He navigated the safety car restart after the Piastri incident pretty fine. There was no problems there. And essentially, he just cruised to a victory that he well and truly deserved. This is his second race win in a row. He's netted what I believe is 68 points over the course of the last 3 races, which is most of any driver comfortably. Lucy, is firstly this a demonstration of Red Bull letting him down? Because he's shown he's not really underperforming in any race weekend from the top of my head. If he was given a McLaren, would you say he would have finished this championship a while ago or been comfortably favourites for it?
Oh yeah, I think it's probably it's no exaggeration to say that if Verstappen was in the McLaren, he could win a Constructors' Championship by himself. I don't think he'd need another driver really. But no, I think that Red Bull have let him down. I think it's been the case sort of since about midway through last year, possibly even longer, but he's just had the driving skills to work around it. That Red Bull just have gone from winning nearly every race to sometimes questioning whether they're going to get points, whether they're going to be in the fight for a podium, and genuine surprise when they do win. So yeah, I think Red Bull have let Verstappen down in that sense, because there's not been a dip in his performance. It's been a dip in the car's performance. And if there has been any dip in his performance concurrently, you can probably put that down to a loss of confidence in the machine he has to drive. You know, you're not going to perform at your best if you feel like your car's actively working against you. So I do think in some ways this is a symptom that Verstappen, not even in a McLaren, just in a slightly more competitive Red Bull, we would be talking about how he's only a few points behind the championship leaders, as it is the fact that we're talking about him whether he's in the championship given the start to the season that Red Bull had is astounding. And there have been a few races this year where he's won where I don't think anyone really saw it coming. I'm thinking Japan mostly, but also Imola to an extent. So yes, I think that to some extent it is Red Bull letting him down, but I also think it's probably testament to the fact that if you are a Red Bull supporter, that they have possibly solved some of their car woes. Although with that, I would say that both Baku and Monza are quite low downforce, and so therefore when we get to some high downforce circuits, it's possible that we see Red Bull's aerodynamic gremlins coming back to bite them again. But still, this is a position which they would have loved to be in at the beginning of the season, which they would be very happy to have reached now, especially given that they have a new team principal. I don't know how much Meki's premiership is responsible for this change, but I think that Red Bull can be satisfied with the job that he's doing if these results, wins, second places, even not just podiums, but P2s, splitting the McLarens, even just being able to fight with the McLarens, if these are sort of the results that can keep being delivered more consistently going on.
You kind of hinted to kind of the question that I was going to ask next. It was a nice segue in, admittedly. Verstappen is 69 points off the top of this championship, which is still led by Oscar Piastri. He's sitting on 255 points. You mentioned that the fact that we've had two lower downforce kind of circuits in Monza and Baku where they've won. Is there a discussion to be had about him being in this championship realistically? Because from my perspective, it's been a great two races. I think the next couple will say a lot. Because if Red Bull are in and around the fight, which is something they have not been, let's be honest, there with, they've been. I think it's very easy to forget how poor they were at the beginning of the season compared to where the McLarens were. Do you think there is a world where he wins this? Is that a possibility in your eyes?
I think that McLaren would still have to have some bad weekends going forward. I think that this is not just a case of, maybe statistically, I will confess I haven't done the maths on this, so perhaps somebody who has been keeping track of the statistics could say it might be feasibly possible that if Verstappen wins the rest of the races and McLaren finish like P2, P3, he needs more weekends like this where McLaren have a DNF, have a double DNF, or otherwise are just generally very uncompetitive for us to be able to say with certainty, oh, he's going to be able to win this. But he will definitely have an influence on the title. I think the last thing that McLaren will want is for a repeat of 2008, not 2008. They'd be quite happy, I think, with a repeat of 2008, repeat of 2007, where they become very sort of bogged down in their own intra-team battles, and then a driver from a different team comes and steals the championship. That is a possibility. I think that unless McLaren have more weekends where they're going to have a big drop in performance for both drivers, not necessarily the same weekend, like perhaps Piastri's never gone particularly well, I think, at Mexico, which obviously is still to come up. He might have a bad weekend there. Norris might have a bad weekend somewhere else. If Verstappen can capitalise on that, then I think he's in with a chance. He's making the most ground. He is speeding up exponentially in trying to get that championship. I would still favour McLaren. They've kind of, in a way, it's a little like the reverse of last year, or like how we were looking sort of mid-season last year, where it looked like Verstappen and Bill have a very commanding lead, but it looked like Norris might be able to close the gap. What McLaren will hope is that, well, Piastri's ahead in the championship right now, so they'd mainly be hoping for him, but for Norris too, can basically do what Verstappen did last year and just shut down some of those wins, continue getting wins, don't let Verstappen go on a roll and start dominating the end of the season. But I think that it's definitely a possibility. I'd still favour one of the McLarens, but there's always a chance. I mean, I think we were saying it even as early as Japan, when it was quite clear that McLaren would be the best in the season, but Verstappen had got that first win, that you shouldn't write him out of the championship battle when he's got a car that's even vaguely capable of delivering results, and he's still mathematically in it. You should, keep your eye out for him and his performance. What do you think, though? Like, that is me coming at it from a very statistics, momentum-based perspective.
I think that with Verstappen, this kind of deficit is a very tough ask for any driver. And if we were talking about the 99% of the other drivers in Formula One's history, we would probably write it off and say it's a bridge too far, right? It's a bit of too much of a tough ask for him to do that. This is Verstappen, though, who is by far, he is definitely one of the greats in terms of talent and in terms of achievement as well. And I feel it's naive to write him off in terms of he's got zero chance. I think the fact people are saying this is still a 2-horse race, I think you could probably make an argument and say this is a 3-horse race with the third horse having an outside shot, because that's how I've got it in my head. McLaren have got to be very careful in the way that they do play out some of these races in terms of strategy, because what they don't want is Verstappen nicking points from either one of their drivers here and there to try and reduce that deficit. I also think...
I think it's worth saying as well that like you said, it's a massive ask. Even currently the largest, I believe, gap close to win a championship might have actually been Verstappen in 2022, when he was, I believe, 46 points down at the maximum deficit to Leclerc and Ferrari. God, remember when we thought Leclerc could win championship with Ferrari ages ago? The biggest gap that Verstappen had to Piastri, so not to a McLaren driver, but to the championship leader this year, has been 104 points. So we're talking over double the current record of the points needed to close a championship. So when we're talking about how likely is it, the odds aren't in his favour.
You are right. The odds aren't in his favour, but I think there is something that stands for him in this kind of discussion, and that is he is inevitable. You can always guarantee that Verstappen, by hook or by crook, is going to perform. He doesn't have off days, so to speak, compared to everyone else. And he's going against two drivers who haven't done it before, who haven't gone and won a title, who haven't let's say, they don't have that championship mentality as of yet. We don't know. People like to say, I think lots of people say Lando Norris doesn't have the mentality, and that is a fair criticism to have. But I also think it's not a guarantee Piastri has that either, And I think we'll discuss that later when we come and discuss his performance this weekend, which by all accounts is horrible. I think he would say that himself. But I think when you've got two drivers who might have vulnerability when it comes to the pressure moments, being the favourite in a battle or in a championship, Verstappen is the type of person who will thrive off that jeopardy. Because there isn't any jeopardy with him. You know what he's going to bring. You know exactly how he's going to fight. You know exactly how he kind of wherever he's going to race, he's going to outperform that Red Bull car. So I think there is definitely discussion, and I think the next two races will be key because they're not going to be high. They're going to be higher downforce tracks. They're going to be tracks where straight line speed is not going to be the be all and end all factor when it comes to having the outright pace. Because we saw that in Monza. I think that was also a big reason as to why the Red Bull actually worked pretty well at Baku is because of the long straights. We're going into two races now where we might not have that type of characteristic in the track, or there will be other higher downforce areas of that track which will play a key role. So the next two will be pivotal. So we're going to have to wait and see with that. But I think people who are saying this is a two-horse race, you might be in for a rude surprise. Put it that way.
I think it is worth noting that Singapore has never been Red Bull's strong suit. Even when in their big dominant 2023 season, it was, I think, it was the only race they didn't win. Last year, they didn't do great. Antonio Giovinazzi's led more laps than Max Verstappen. So I agree, the next two races will be super important just because even if you feel Red Bull can conquer their demons at Singapore and win, obviously Red Bull will love it if they win because the McLarens are leading and then they both have mechanical DNS or crash into each other or something. But if Red Bull can win that, and Verstappen can win that. I mean, obviously, it would be great if Yuki Tsunoda won, just because it would be just out of nowhere. But if Verstappen can win on his own merit and on the car's merit, as opposed to just benefiting from the misfortune of faster cars, then you will really feel that could be a big turning point. Because if they can conquer their demons at Singapore, you could probably argue they could do it anywhere.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. They do have a bit of a Singapore curse, don't they?
Maybe that belongs more in a preview episode.
Yeah, we'll come back to it when we preview the Singapore Grand Prix. But the next big story to talk about was the presence of a Williams, and it's not been the Williams car that has been the better car. I guess Alex Albon's had a far more comfortable season compared to Carlos Sainz, who feels like he's always in the walls, but not this week. Not this weekend, because he was able to come home in third place for an incredibly well-deserved podium. And it's the first podium for him in Williams colours, like I mentioned. And I think this is a reminder to not just the team that he's at, not just the fans, but also to himself that he's still got it. He's struggled for large parts of the season with the car. But now I think that's going to be, this result is the type of result that will serve as a big confidence booster. How impressive was he this weekend, Lucy? Because I know you're a Williams fan. You're going to have a lot to say, aren't you?
Vindication! I've been saying that a Williams podium is going to happen all season. Well, longer than all season, I think. I've been saying it ever since I started watching the sport, when you may be asking how many points they got in that first season I watched, and the answer is 1. But I've been saying it ever since then, that Williams are going to get a podium, and they got a podium. I will say that, obviously, in my heart of hearts, I would have loved it if Alex Albon had not DNF'd that first qualifying session, because who knows, maybe we could have had a Williams 2-3 on the grid, Williams double podium. The possibilities are endless. But I was very happy with the result. Did Sainz benefit from the fact that he got a lap in very early in Q3 before even more red flags, and also some rain came down which hampered other people. Yes, of course he did. I will be one of the first people to say that in terms of how much can you earn a P2 start, P2 starts have probably been earned more. However, that he was just very solid. He was very solid in P2 until the overcut worked very well for George Russell, and and Sainz did have a bit of a slow stop. So Williams, you do still need to work on your pit stops, but I will forgive you because it's a podium. I'm not crying, by the way. I did that earlier.
It was happy tears.
It was happy tears. It was happy tears. Oh my gosh. This is so annoying because I've been planning the incredible things that I was going to say in this segment for the last week, and now I've completely forgotten everything. But no, it felt like it's interesting because some podiums this year, like Nico Hülkenberg's, arguably Isaac Hadjar's a bit, maybe this is also wishful thinking, have felt like Nico Hülkenberg's almost felt like sort of like a finality moment, like an end to the fact that he's had so long for a podium wait. Isaac Hadjar's felt kind of like a sort of like an incredible moment, but sort of a once in a blue moon, slightly rogue RB podium. This Williams podium feels like, and maybe this is the delusion, but I don't think it is that it feels like the start of many more Williams podiums to come. And I pray a championship fight in 2026, but I will not base my whole happiness on whether or not that happens. So no, and especially considering that Sainz has had a rough season catching up to Albon. I still think despite this podium, that Albon has been the more solid driver for Williams and the more consistent driver. And I would still probably rather have a consistent driver who gets me lots of P5s and P6s than a driver who will get like 3 DNFs in a row and then a podium. I will prefer consistency, but I don't think he had a great weekend and Williams had a great weekend. It was just fantastic. And I pray to God that we're going to repeat it. And yeah, I think I would take the championship fight being ridiculously boring for the end of time if you told me that Williams were going to get more podiums. So yes, Anwar will now presumably provide some unbiased commentary on that podium, but you've had the unadulterated joy.
We've had the passion. It's time for the logic now. But I think overall, I think this is a very much a reminder for a lot of people that Sainz was able to be competitive in a Ferrari car against a teammate like Charles Leclerc, right? Yeah, he's obviously talented. And I think having the start of the season that he's had is probably pretty demoralizing in my eyes. But I think when push comes to shove, when you've got to have, he ultimately got on the grid as high up as he did because a bit of fortune that went his way, right? But when those opportunities come, you've got to be able to capitalize. And when he did have faster cars behind him, right? Yet that still didn't deter him, and he ended up keeping that podium. I think that's a representation of the fact that when you have a quality driver and you give him just an inch, they will take the most advantage out of it. I'm thinking Daniel Ricciardo in Monza when he got McLaren's first win for a long 2021. Long time. Yeah, in 2021, right? You've given a driver who was low on confidence an opportunity, but you know that he's going to perform when the time comes. And that's exactly what happened here. Carlos Sainz is a guy who is one of the best drivers on the grid in my head, in spite of the poor performances at the start of the season. At no point have I thought that Alex Albon has humbled him or embarrassed him, which has been what some people have said. But I think this is a very good result. And I think this is a representation of how far Williams have come. So this is going to be me glazing them, basically, because they've been in the dumps for years. I remember when I watched when Frank Williams and that family were running the team, which is no longer happening. that they were struggling financially, and under the helm and the leadership of James Vowles, they've become a real competitor, a team worth following, but if you know what I mean. So I think it's very good. They're on a very good trajectory as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if they have another podium this season. It really wouldn't. But it's important for Williams to show this can't be a flash in the pan. If they end up finishing, if this is last good result of the season, that would probably be a bit disappointing. I want them to be able to continue and use this momentum up in my head. But that's kind of my assessment of it. I think he deserved the podium that he got. So very happy for him, very happy for Williams. Can't really complain. I like it's a nice heartwarming story to see, if you know what I mean. It's a team that probably of all the teams on the grid, I think everyone's got a bit of a soft spot for them, you know. So I think a lot of people were very happy. Not as happy as Lucy, I'd say, but at least pretty happy, right?
I'm going to record this segment, I hope you know, and play it back on this podcast every time you say that I'm delusional for thinking Williams are going to do really well.
Really?
Yes.
Lucy?
Yes, I will.
You're going to hold this against me and Daniel because we've been saying...
I'm not holding it against Daniel. Daniel's not here.
Oh, just me. Okay, got you.
No, but I also think it's worth saying for anyone else who enjoys stats, is that this is Williams. This also makes first time that Williams have scored over 100 points in a season for a while, which is very good. And I feel like if we're working in reverse time, we've still got a few more years before they get another win. But we can hope and pray. Also, this means that Carlos Sainz is, in addition to being one of only 3 drivers to drive for interesting enough, also the 3 most successful F1 teams in history, just based on stats, which are Ferrari, McLaren, and Williams. He's also only the second driver to get a podium at all 3 teams. He can't be the second driver to get a win at all 3 teams because he didn't win at McLaren. Although I guess he could hypothetically go back to McLaren and get a win there. But I'd rather he stay at Williams and win lots of things here. So there you go. If you like stats, if you like Williams-based stats, then consider your stats told.
Indeed. I think it's time to move on to the next story of the kind of race, and that was the story of the 2 McLarens. As Oscar Piastri, like we mentioned, retired on lap 1 after having probably his worst weekend in the sport, I would probably describe. And we'll ask Lucy that same question in a moment. Norris as well, probably a lot of people have said this is a missed opportunity. I agree. He only finished 7th on a weekend where his teammate retired, which was a possible opportunity to take a massive bite out of the championship advantage. And at the end of it, he only took 6 points out of it. Lucy, firstly, let's talk about Oscar Piastri. He has been, a lot of people have said, very calm, very collected, and just has a very good mentality. But this weekend, we saw a very unusual Oscar Piastri compared to what we see normally. What do you think this was his worst weekend in the sport, firstly?
Yeah, I think Oscar Piastri had a very bad weekend. I also think not only was it his worst weekend and definitely worst race so far this season, I think it might in general just be the worst race start we've seen all season. I am slightly struggling to think of a worse one, which is saying something because we've got 2 Alpines on the grid. So it was just abysmal by all metrics. It was this, and also I think this is not just because he is leading the championship and fighting for a championship, although obviously that does play quite a role in it. This was even if McLaren were only in the midfield, you would be saying that this was a bad weekend for Piastri. I think the main thing this year that he's sort of been heralded for has been his consistency. And kind of for that reason, it's sort of been said that he doesn't really kind of crack under pressure. He doesn't let things get to him. because he's been very consistent in his driving, even when Norris has had very good weekends. Piastri has also had a good weekend, even if it's not as good as Norris. I'm thinking, for example, of like weekends where that hasn't been the case. Bahrain, for example, where Norris did not have a very good weekend, but Piastri had a really good one. When you compare that to some, apart from Australia, but Australians are cursed, so we don't count that. There's not been a weekend where he has had a very bad performance, where his teammates had a good performance. And I mean, his teammate also didn't have a great performance this weekend, but I would say this is the first weekend where it's really felt like there was a gulf in potential the whole way through between the two McLaren teammates in Norris's favour. Piastri will be hoping for sure that it's just a blip. McLaren were very dominant at Singapore last year. He'll be hoping that happens again and that he can get back onto at least a run of a podium. He'll be wanting a win, but the podium for now would probably do. And mathematically, it's not the worst result he could have done. You know, Norris from his DNF lost 25 points to his teammate, and Piastri lost 6. So there's that. But, you know, it was a terrible weekend for him and terrible weekend for the team as a whole, but we're going to get to that. So I won't keep talking about that.
Just one more question on Piastri. He's obviously, a lot has been made of Lando Norris in the way he deals with pressure. He's very vocal about it. I think that's to his detriment in my eyes. But Piastri's always been considered a bit of an underdog in this. This was Norris's championship to lose, some might have said, at the beginning of the season. Now, Piastri is by far and away the favourite now on the basis of his advantage at the top of the championship. Do you think that the fact that he is the favourite is potentially playing on him? Because, like you mentioned, he crashed in qualifying in a mistake that looked really clunky, but yeah, he proceeded to have the worst start anyone's had of the season. He didn't get off the grid, if you guys don't remember, fell back to last, and then proceeded to bin it into turn 3. So a very, very horrible turn of events for him. Do you think this is pressure playing on him?
To be honest, it could be. I mean, we talked earlier about how about sort of the whole thing of a championship mentality, which because I don't really know how we're supposed to define it. It feels like everyone defines it in a different way depending on which driver they're wanting to talk positively or negatively about. So don't really put much stock by it as a phrase. But if we're talking about it in terms of experience in a championship fight and in winning a championship, thinking about it, it's interesting. Verstappen obviously has lots of experience in both. And basically every championship fight that he has had, like a proper one, he's won it. So that is probably good for his championship mentality, if I think I'm using that term correctly. Oh, well, I can't be stopped if I'm not.
The point with it is it's very much an intangible, right? It's very hard to determine, and it's very hard. So it's a very much a thing of do some people just have it, and it's very hard to define it past that.
It's just weird. I don't really know. It's just a magic concept. It means whatever you want it to mean. And right now, I want it to mean what's best for my analogy, so I'm going to go with it. Norris has championship mentality in the sense that he has had a championship fight before. Not a close one in the way that the McLaren one has seemed like it could go back and forward quite a lot. He was very much in his championship fight last year as well, the underdog who would have needed a lot of points to win the championship. In a way, that's also countered by the fact that is it better to not have any championship experience at all, or to have championship experience but for it to be experience in losing a championship? I don't know. Whereas Piastri, last year he was kind of nowhere. He got a couple of wins and he was a very good second driver for McLaren, but he was a second driver. This year, somehow through good driving, he has ended up leading the championship in a championship fight. And maybe this is the point in the season. Maybe it's because of how long the season is. maybe this is as perhaps it starts to heat up a bit in McLaren. I have kind of thought that while I don't think it'll ever become very hostile between the teammates, it doesn't seem like that sort of dynamic, although I could be wrong. I think it will get more tense, just as the number of points whittle down and the gap presumably will whittle down a bit as well. And especially, I think, once the teams sewn up the constructors, which they will do, this was just a delay in that happening. Once the teams sewed up the constructors, it will kind of become possibly much more tense. So it could just be that, in that, as Piastri's now been leading the championship for a long time, and if some people start to take that as it is a given that he's going to win, or as other people alternatively start to say, well, there's only so much you can kind of hold your own at the top before you start to falter, particularly in your first championship battle, you're going to have off days, you're going to have off weekends. And Piastri kind of got lucky this weekend in that his off weekend also coincided with it not being Norris's best weekend. But that very easily could have not been the case. And so I think it'll be interesting going forward as to whether we see Norris as well as Piastri, but I think with Piastri it will be more noticeable because he is kind of known for his consistency. Whether we start to see their performances falter slightly. Arguably, we've maybe even already seen it in the team with how their pit stops are going, which is badly. But yeah, I don't think it's to do with having a championship mentality. I don't think you're like born with some sort of genetic code that means you're going to be a good champion or you're not going to be a good champion. I think it might be to do with personality types and whether you're somebody who responds better to having pressure or whether you're somebody who responds better to just not having anyone talk about you and then you perform and then people are like, where did you come from? But yeah, I feel like it was a rough weekend for him as opposed to a sign that he's going to go on a downward slide for the rest of the season, and it's whether Norris can go on enough of or Verstappen. We've spent most of the podcast talking about him, or Verstappen is going to go on an upward slide to meet him and take the championship. I feel this was an off weekend, but it is maybe a sign that, he's not invincible. No driver's invincible. No car is invincible.
Unless your name is Max Verstappen. I think he's as close.
He's probably as close to invincible as possible, but I think kind of we still see with Verstappen the fact that it might not necessarily be in kind of dips in performance. But like Spain this year, we can see that he tends to have like not necessarily dips in his pace, but maybe more as the car becomes harder to work with, or if he feels that stewarding decisions have gone against him, that he maybe becomes more demoralized by that or drives in a kind of less polished way than he usually does. I'm bringing up Spain because he drove into someone for no other reason than that. But so I think that it's Piastri having an off weekend. To be honest, I hope for the championship's sake that it is an off weekend, because I would like the championship to get closer. I would like Norris to have a few weekends where he outperforms Piastri, a couple of wins in a row, and closes that gap down. It's 25 points now. If Norris wins the next two, even if Piastri finishes second, that gap closes down to 11 points, which is a much closer championship fight, kind of what we want to see. So I don't want him to go on a downturn. I don't want any driver to win a championship because a different driver was doing very well and then just had a massive slump in performance. Because you want to see the drivers fight and really feel like the best driver came out on top as opposed to the least worst driver came out on top.
I think that is another element of it, how that will impact how entertaining it is. Just moving on to Norris before we move on to the prediction and some of the other smaller things that happened over the course of that Grand Prix. Has Norris missed an opportunity do you think this was Norris failing to capitalise on Piastri's poor performance this weekend, because he obviously had a bit of a bad start. He dropped the position to Hadjar and then was caught napping on the restart as well by Charles Leclerc and only finished 7th, which is where he started. Do you think that in a car like the McLaren, he missed an opportunity to move forward in a weekend which was ultimately a bit of a free hit for him?
Yeah, I think just from statistically, this was a big opportunity missed by Norris. Like I kind of said earlier, when Norris DNF'd, Piastri gained 25 points more, but I'm just looking at kind of the basics here. Piastri gained 25 points on him when Piastri DNF'd, meaning that it is now all square in terms of, well, it's not actually all square because of Canada. Now that it's mostly square in terms of races DNF'd, Norris only gained 6 points on his teammate. So from a statistics point of view, he did fail to capitalise, and possibly, especially with Piastri DNFing so early, he will have felt like he didn't capitalise on an opportunity. Had Piastri DNF'd, maybe had a mechanical DNF later in the race, perhaps much like Norris, Piastri was also failing to make headway through the field and would have ended like P5, or not P5, sorry, like P10, where he started. But maybe he would have done well. And if he'd done badly just on the track and then he DNF, we would have said that Norris maybe hadn't capitalised as much as he should have done, but this was clearly not McLaren's best weekend. Because Piastri DNF very early, we've got no way of commenting on how he would have done. So we've kind of just got Norris's performance to go off. This is by no means a Lando Norris terrible performance. I don't never kind of bought into the idea that he sort of bottles things, because I always think that kind of there's probably something to do with it, be it something to do with confidence in the car or confidence in driving or just general competitiveness of other cars. But McLaren also just had a terrible weekend. We saw it in their pit stops. Even from the practice sessions, they weren't looking as dominant as usual, although they still would have been hoping for at least a top 5. I mean, they would have wanted a podium, but at least a top 5. But this then also is kind of I obviously have my own biases. I like to see different teams do well. And I also think that in general, I've been quite harsh on McLaren and their performance as a team as opposed to the drivers this year. So that may also be that talking. But I feel Norris didn't capitalise, but also McLaren, I get the feeling, were never going to have a good race, no matter what Norris did.
Yeah, just on the kind of pit stop note, they seem to always be screwing over Norris with that. Admittedly, I think his last 4 pit stops, they haven't had one under 3.9 seconds, which isn't very good. So I think for Norris, he's probably hoping that front right gets his act together, basically. I just want to, before we go into the prediction segment, there were just 2 or 3 drivers I wanted to highlight, who we talked about in the preview as kind of, they needed a good performance and it would do massive benefits to them if they did so. And that was one being Yuki Tsunoda, who has been under a lot of pressure in that Red Bull, and he was able to put out a performance which, you know what, remind people that, okay, there might be a driver in there in spite of the car not working for him, which was nice to see. And I think the important thing for him is to ensure that he can kind of replicate that now, because this can't be a flash in the pan. He can't go back to finishing 13th every other race. Another person who was in a bit of a rust as well was Kimi Antonelli, who had a really poor European segment of the season, and this weekend was able to kind of put that all behind him, because he kind of looked like the Kimi Antonelli that we saw at the beginning of the season that we were really impressed by. We haven't seen that level of performance from Antonelli for quite some time, and I think that's a very nice thing to have. If you guys don't remember, he finished in 4th place, which nets him 12 points. Wasn't able to catch up to Carlos Sainz, but he started in 4th because he did well in qualifying, and he kept that position, which ultimately you can't really complain about. The last one, just to note, is Liam Lawson, who has been overshadowed a lot, I feel, by his teammate, rookie teammate, Isaac Hadjar. But this weekend, again, served a bit of a reminder to people that there is, a competent driver in there. And I think, Lucy, you mentioned this earlier. RB actually have a good lineup if both drivers are confident, I think. Hadjar has got a podium this season and has overall been really impressive in my eyes, and I think in a lot of other people's eyes. Liam Lawson has taken his time to readapt to that RB, but I think now is beginning to bring the level of consistency that you kind of expect out of a driver of his level of relative experience. We've got 6 rookies in the grid, so the fact he's had a season, pretty much 2 full seasons, I'd say, if you kind of include all of the standing results that he had. I think he's beginning to put a string of results in, and that's going to be interesting to see how that influences RB's decision-making in terms of drivers next year. Let's move on to the prediction segment, and this is going to be pretty quick because me and Lucy had absolute stinkers just to proceed, just to like kind of give you that teaser. The only person who kind of has some degree of self-respect here was Daniel. So I'm going to start with him because it can only go downhill after that. Because he went with Leclerc on pole, didn't happen, but he did say Verstappen would win, which nets him 3 points. He said Leclerc in 2nd, Piastri in 3rd, which no points for either of those kind of positions. He also said no P4 Norris, P5 Russell, because neither of them were within 1 point, 1 position of kind of their finishing position. We can't give them any points for that. So for at least as P1, he got 3 points, which is something. Lucy, how about you? What did you get?
I think it says something that I did so abysmally in my predictions, and yet I'm still in a good mood. That reason is, of course, Williams. I said pole Leclerc. He did not get pole. I still think that was a reasonable prediction. He'd got pole the previous 4 years in a row. Kind of surprised he didn't. I said P1 Norris. I thought there would be another different winner at Baku. There was not. Instead, Verstappen becomes only the 2nd driver to win twice at this circuit. The other being his former teammate, future Cadillac driver, Sergio Perez. I said Leclerc P2. He did not finish P2. I said Piastri P3. He did not finish. I said Verstappen P4. He performed better than I was expecting. But really, I think that was just because I felt like I was being too mean to Ferrari, and so I had to say they'd do fairly well. And then I said P5 Bortoletto. So I was kind of right in there being a slightly rogue driver up there, but I didn't put that driver high enough up, and also I picked the wrong team. So I'm currently sitting on a lovely 0, and no spoilers, but we're going to keep a very similar vibe when we get to the next section.
Yeah, I'm also going to rattle through mine pretty quickly. I said pole Lewis Hamilton. I had belief in Ferrari. Horrible mistake once again. I put Piastri in P1. He retired, so that's probably the worst type of prediction you could have made. Verstappen in P2, so I at least kind of hoped that Verstappen would be in the fight, and he was more than in the fight. He dominated. I put Norris in P3, Hamilton P4, Gasly P5. I'm not going to spend more time on this because, frankly, I'm embarrassed by some of those predictions. Let's go through Daniel's DNF and random prediction, because he said Pierre Gasly would DNF. He didn't DNF though, but his random prediction came through. He said both Lucy and I would get less than 4 points. Just spoiler alert, did not get more than 4 points, and we did not get 4 points either. So he's got another 3 points, which brings his total to 4, which I think he will be very happy about, considering the fact that me and Lucy did not get any more points from our DNF or random predictions. Lucy, what did you say for your DNF and random? Let's get this done quickly.
I said Antonelli was going to DNF. He had an actually very good time. My random, I said there would be at least 2 full safety cars. I'm so annoyed I didn't make my prediction that there were going to be loads of red flags in quali. I keep thinking that I'm going to do rogue predictions. I thought that Ferrari would double DNF in Zandvoort and then didn't say it. I've just got to go with my rogue vibes more. There were not 2 full safety cars because only 1 driver even DNF'd. Very boring.
Yeah, mine. I put DNF for Charles Leclerc. Did not happen. I said 14 cars finished the race as my random prediction. We finished with 19. So that is 0 points from the DNF and random prediction for me and Lucy, which gives Daniel the win for this round. Got 4 points versus my 0 point total and my 1 point total and Lucy's 0 point total. Well, that brings us to the end of this extensive Baku review. I want to thank my co-host Lucy for joining me for this episode. We'll be back at some point in the next week to preview the upcoming Singapore Grand Prix. And if you guys are all on campus, I would invite you guys to join our WhatsApp group chats, which allow you guys to join the podcast and be there for our race watch along on Sunday in the Fab building. Essentially, we'll see you then. To thank everyone for sitting and listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.